everybody, and welcome to this CAP talk. I'm Mary Wellstead, and I'm a fellow at CAP. Before I introduce Ric, who is today's speaker, I just want to make sure that everybody here knows that this event is being webcast. And as part of that, could I please remind everyone to turn off their cell phones and bleepers now? I met Ric Fouad for the first time 5 years ago when he came to Harvard to spend 1 year as a visiting scholar. During that time, he participated in the CAP workshop program, where he shared his experiences of the Milton Hershey Foundation with his fellow participants in the program. In the spring of 2010, he gave a talk to an invited audience, which was appropriately entitled The Chocolate Heist. Ric explained to us how the Milton Hershey School Trust was set up to fund a residential school for children who were in need of care away from home in a safe environment where they'd be educated and prepared for a successful future in the outside world. Ric knew all about this because Ric himself was educated at the school. The trust, which set up this school, had enormous resources, which could have been of huge importance in rescuing children who were considered to be at risk. However, with the benefit of his inside experience, Ric gave us an account of the multiple failures of the trust to do precisely that. He told us of his numerous efforts to draw attention to these failings and the way in which his efforts were met with resolute opposition by most of the relevant authorities who could and should perhaps have shared his concerns. Today, we are delighted to welcome Ric's return to CAP, where he will add a further chapter to the story he recounted in 2010. However, before he begins that chapter, I would like to say just a little about Ric. First and foremost, Ric is a truly impressive individual. He has never given up hope on a cause in which he believes so strongly. Ric was separated from his family at an early age, and he spent his childhood in various forms of foster care and residential care. He eventually arrived at the Milton Hershey School, where he spent 7 years. After a very tough start to life, Ric went on to the University of Pennsylvania, where he received his BA cum laude, and then to NYU. There he obtained his JD. Ric's law career began at Jones, Day, Revis & Pogue, after which he served as in-house counsel at the Taisei Corporation, a Japanese construction company. He became a fluent Japanese speaker, and he went on to found a commercial law practice focused on Japan. He is currently general counsel at Lexington Corporation, a Japanese financial advisory firm. His work out there includes an adjunct faculty position at Temple School's campus in Japan. However, Ric's childhood experiences have also led him to devote as much as of spare time as possible, if he has any, on pro bono work alongside his commercial career. He's the president of Protect the Hershey's Children. He serves on the advisory boards of the Hannah Arendt Center at Bard College and the International Honors Program of World Learning in Brattleboro, Vermont. He's also involved in refugee property restoration in the city of Sarajevo in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Today, we will hear more from Ric about his 14-year effort to secure reforms to the Milton Hershey School Trust and improve the future for disadvantaged children. Ric, you're an incredible individual, and we really look forward to hearing the next chapter of your story.
I can't follow that. Thank you, Mary, for the gracious and sensitive introduction. I don't think I've ever had an introduction that touching. I'm speechless. Thank you all for joining us this evening, including our web audience. Special thanks, of course, also to Harvard Law School and the Child Advocacy Program, Professors Betsy Bartholet, Jessica Budnitz, and again, Professor Mary Wellstead, along with Margot Strucker and Eleanor Topping, for the huge effort that went into planning this event. I'm humbled by the opportunity to reflect with you on the $11 billion Hershey charity and why such a staggering sum has produced what I submit are less than ideal programs. But the subject is complex, so please buckle up as we'll move fast with more ground to cover than time allows. But you can help close the gaps by contributing your own thoughts during the Q&A, because these talks are always more rewarding when they're interactive rather than just a monologue. Before I begin, I'd like to mention a select group, the Hershey Advisory Council, who were assembled to advise Pennsylvania Attorney General Kathleen Kane on reforming Hershey as she completed an unprecedented investigation of the problems we'll discuss tonight. They are the distinguished educator, Dr. Arthur Levine, known to all at GSE, Randy Roth, the U of Hawaii Trust Law Scholar, Matt Crenson, the Dean of Orphanage Studies, Boys Town's inimitable Ron Thompson, and Professors John Click and Rob Sitkoff of Penn and Harvard Law, respectively. We'll return to this group in a bit. While I intend tonight to lay out, as advertised, a blueprint for ideal Hershey programs, actually achieving this goal requires us first to understand how this charity stumbled and produced a status quo that adulterates decision-making, whether asset use or program. By way of brief background, the Milton Hershey School was created as an orphanage in 1909 by candy magnate Milton S. Hershey, who transferred virtually his entire net worth to the charity while still alive, funding cutting-edge programs. These included housing children not in warehouse facilities, but in the cottage model, with kids cared for by house-parent couples, in homes spread throughout 10,000 breathtaking acres. The charity paid for all medical and dental care, housed and fed the kids, educated them, and otherwise saw to their material needs. Hershey students worked on farms and milked cows as part of their training. Vocational education was emphasized so graduates would be self-sufficient after leaving. A 2-year junior college provided young graduates with an ideal bridge between the orphanage and life beyond. Mr. Hershey thought of just about everything. Comparisons of Hershey outcomes in its early years with today's foster care are revealing, even if not entirely apples to apples. As many of you know, 30% of America's homeless were raised in foster care, along with 25% of America's prison population. A 2010 study showed that by their mid-20s, only half of those raised in care were employed, 6 of 10 males were convicted of a crime, 3 of 4 young women were receiving public assistance, and only 3 of 100 had completed even a junior college degree. But the Hershey students all had jobs on the day they left, or went on to college and were known for their work ethic and study habits. This is not to romanticize Hershey nor any orphanage, and I'm happy to discuss orphanage failings later, including the Skills IQ study and Hershey data. It's just that residential care has its place, and there are vital lessons to be learned from the Hershey model that can help us to fashion ideal programs. In this vein, it's simply inescapable that by the 1950s, Hershey outcomes dwarfed those of its peer orphanages and foster care generally. So with its huge endowment, best-in-class programs, the rest of the Hershey story should have been only sweetness and light as the charity improved steadily and became the greatest savior of at-risk children on the planet. But then I wouldn't be here speaking with you tonight. And as I said in my first talk, after Mr. Hershey's death in 1945, if you refract the charity's decisions through the prism of its child welfare mission, they make no sense. But if you refract the same decisions through the prisms of local economic development, self-enrichment by the charity stewards, advancement of accommodating Hershey alumni, and political goals, they make perfect sense. We already looked at asset use in 2010, so we can skip it tonight, because I'm sure everyone here clicked the CAP website announcement links to prepare for this evening. Some of those looks don't exactly inspire confidence. So for that minuscule number of you who might be a bit more like me when I was a student, which means you were watching the World Series last night and came here because somebody said there would be free pizza, please let me provide just a snapshot of Hershey asset use pattern, because it is the Darwinian struggle over finite resources, pitting needy kids against powerful interests that also distorts program decisions. The core problem started around 1960, when a decision was quietly made to cap Hershey enrollment at about 1,600 children, while refusing to spend resources beyond the town of Hershey. Now, when a child welfare charity strikes serving more needy kids from its to-do list, it's left with a kind of lottery winner's problem to try to spend an ever-growing pile of money. But the Hershey board was creative and embarked upon something out of the movie Brewster's Millions. Remember, where Richard Pryor has to spend a huge fortune as quickly as possible? only the Hershey board was spending money earmarked for needy kids. This started in 1963 when $60 million and 543 acres were diverted to build Penn State, a medical school, pictured here. In 1972, they built this administrative building, Founders Hall, for $50 million, importing 1,550 tons of marble just for the rotunda, the second largest in the Western Hemisphere, clearly an essential item for any self-respecting orphanage. They converted a benign nonprofit company into the supposedly for-profit Herco, which owns hotels and an amusement park. This gave them and their cronies hefty board pay and a way to funnel charitable resources to the local economy, spiking job numbers and swelling tax coffers, but without meaningful profits for needy kids. People who enjoy Hershey Park today, pictured here, have no idea that needy kids subsidize it, nor that it has become a political patronage vehicle. Luxury golf has also drained assets, such as the $25 million recently spent on Hershey Links, buying a $3 million insolvent golf course for $12 million, building a swanky $5 million clubhouse, pictured here, and subsidizing massive operating losses, including the board's free golf. Board compensation has provided another creative spending outlet and has grown so outrageous it gave rise to what we call the Millionaires Club. That is, board members who have amassed over $1 million in total compensation from their Hershey part-time board work. Here are some of the club members posing in front of what they call Zim's Palace, the posh Hotel Hershey, where they treat themselves to lavish lodging, wining and dining, free golf, luxury spa treatments, and other perks in true lottery winner style. Current board chairman, Hershey alumnus Bob Cavanaugh is pictured in the center next to former Pennsylvania Attorney General Leroy Zimmerman, the source of the Zim's Palace nickname and something of a former oversight official, Fox, guarding the charitable trust henhouse. I could give you many more examples, but I think you get the picture, no pun intended. And to illustrate the overall result, in 1970, the charity had $180 million and serves some 1,550 children. Today, it has $11 billion, but serves only 1,800 children, which means that they added just 250 kids to total enrollment over 43 years, despite gaining $10.8 billion. I believe this constitutes the single most egregious asset deployment failure in child welfare charitable trust history. By way of comparison, Boys Town, which was also founded as an orphanage around the same time, today has $1 billion and provides direct services to 130,000 children and families, and indirect services to nearly 1 million people. But make no mistake, Hershey decisions are perfectly rational for a status quo that has been re-engineered to disfavor needy kids while personally benefiting those in charge and politically benefiting Pennsylvania oversight officials, such as former AG Zimmerman, who you saw in the Zim's Palace photo. The same re-engineered status quo similarly adulterates Hershey program decisions, with non-child agendas again trumping the interests of needy kids in virtually every case. To illustrate, we can start with the junior college that provided such a wonderful transitioning bridge. The charity stewards closed this in 1965 to help fund Penn State's medical school, never mind that doing so abruptly cut adrift young Hershey graduates at a critical stage in their lives. Then there was centralization, where they removed Hershey children from their natural and community-wide homes and telescoped them into one centralized compound, segregated from the community. Spending billions of dollars, they took the most unhealthy part of the original model, the large group home, and actually made it worse while enriching many people and freeing up orphanage land for development. The school's vaunted farm program was also shut down, despite ample research showing what a remarkable pedagogical tool it had been for shaping at-risk youth, something reflected in an Urban Institute study. Again, guess who gets to develop the vacated land? Items like the number of children per group home, economizing on student medical care, child safety measures, economizing on staff, leadership hiring, board composition, and countless other decisions, large and small, all reveal the status quo's skewed priorities, whether historically or at present. There is simply no way to sugarcoat it. The board does not base decisions on what's best for needy kids, but on what's best for themselves and their political allies. And those political allies reciprocate on oversight matters, which is why this charity has been able to fight off every attempt at reform. They have all the funds they need to buy off public officials. But the area where distorted Hershey policy does the most severe damage is enrollment. Please recall that by the 1950s, society realized that separating poor kids from loving parents was terribly expensive and psychologically damaging, so that orphanages ceased being used as a tool to break up poor families. Orphanages as the sole answer were replaced by a full range of less intrusive, cheaper, and more effective services. Matt Crenson's Invisible Orphanage, where the walls are torn down to deliver help to children in or near their homes, rather than institutionalizing them. Kids who did end up in residential care, whether foster care, group homes, or the fewer remaining children's homes, truly needed it. Boys Town again illustrates this evolution. But insular Hershey became like something out of the movie, The Land That Time Forgot. Remember, the island where the dinosaurs still roam? Because in Hershey, it is policy dinosaurs that still roam, as evolutionary logic was stood upside down. And those in charge started rejecting foster care children, wards of the court, children without any parents, in favor of ones who were merely poor or simply had one dead parent. The goal became to persuade poor parents to surrender their kids to Hershey in exchange for free clothing, state-of-the-art school buildings, and promises of college scholarship money. Basically, struggling parents were presented with a Hobbesian choice between putting their kids in Hershey group homes or seeing them grow up in poverty. This is reflected in the school's own internal documents. Here is an example from 1988 that was leaked to us, explaining how Hershey is to shed its orphanage image and be marketed to families as a boarding school with full scholarships for children ages 4 to 15. There is no mention of kids who require residential care, and it states that being at Hershey is an honor. I can't say that I know anyone else who thinks that ending up in residential care is an honor or who recruits young children for group home living. But let's look at current implementation. Here are passages from a 2008 newspaper puff piece glowingly describing Hershey enrollment. The article focuses on a 4-year-old girl with a loving mother who has been persuaded to surrender her child to the school. Hershey School President, alumnus Johnny O'Brien, is quoted as saying, "The Ivy League environment in kindergarten can better form self-confidence." Mom confides that her decision is merely because Hershey can provide more materially. During this 4-year-old girl's first month at Hershey, Mom is so distraught that she nearly takes her home. In her poignant words, "I just missed her presence and her hugs and her kisses and her giggles and her smiles and talking to me. She would talk from the time she got up to the time she went to bed. I wouldn't get 1 minute of peace because she just didn't know how to be quiet. I said, 'Can you be quiet for 1 minute?' And we timed it, and she couldn't do it. It was killing her." The article also describes the child's pain and Hershey policy discouraging any visits with the mother during the first 4 to 6 weeks, with phone calls also limited to once per week. But not to worry. As this child struggles with a deliberate and traumatizing rupture of the mother-child bond, Hershey alumnus administrator Myron McCurdy is there to offer helpful guidance. Says Mr. McCurdy, "Focus on your dreams and goals. Don't give in to the temporary pain and sadness." This is to a 4-year-old girl needlessly separated from her mother. You can't make this stuff up. We'll look momentarily at the results of this child welfare thinking. And it's not just enrollment policy that remains backwards. For instance, the administration created an experimental intake facility, Springboard Academy, that housed students in 20 child bedrooms and had to be abandoned almost immediately after $41 million was squandered on it. They also tried to pack kids even more densely together by introducing 40-child block housing, also promoted by the alumni administrators, such as Vice President Peter Gert, who declared, "We call this back to the future," actually boasting about returning to the bad old days when Hershey itself put kids into 30-child group homes. This retrograde plan was defeated only after reform advocates and house parents combined in a furious lobbying campaign, which illustrates another decades-old Hershey problem. Even the most dedicated frontline staff labor under dubious leadership and often bizarre decisions. I could cite more examples, but I think this is sufficient to support my original thesis. Hershey program decisions, just like asset use ones, make no sense when viewed through the prism of the charity's child welfare mission, because they are intended to advance non-child agendas. The dysfunction this produces is revealed in startling attrition figures and cost-benefit math. Despite spending $100,000 per child annually, vastly more kids depart Hershey each year than graduate, whether expelled or voluntarily removed. During the last 10 years, at least 2,034 kids were removed, while only 1,439 graduated, many without diplomas. More than one child is removed on average every school day. Given the emotional dislocation this visits on kids jarringly cycled in and out, it is arguable that net-net, Hershey is doing more harm than good, while spending more money than anyone on the planet. The economies are shocking. It's about $20 million lost each year for the 200 or so removed children. The Hershey leadership protests that attrition is due to the kids being homesick. This is precisely the point, and you would think they would finally figure it out. If they were enrolling only kids who needed residential care instead of recruiting many who don't, homesickness would not create this kind of problem. More troubling, vast numbers of kids are being expelled after flawed programs fail them, masking underlying problems. The Hershey board won't address systemic mistakes because it can simply expel the kids harmed by them. Some children have been expelled after they were sexually abused as a direct result of housing policies that put them at risk to cut costs. When these kids exhibited post-abuse trauma, they were kicked out and, in essence, punished for the board's own policy blunders. Other kids are kicked out just because someone in authority felt like it. There is zero due process when kids are removed and no one meaningfully advocates for them. Most unconscionable and illustrative of all, the Hershey leadership has been expelling children for the crime of adolescent depression. Even the best behaved kids have been kicked out rather than provided help the moment the school thinks they may be a risk of suicide, as the leadership has a policy of zero tolerance for bad publicity. The most egregious example is what was done to Abby Bartels, pictured here, who was enrolled in Hershey at the age of 4, where she spent the next 10 years of her life. Abby was an honor roll student, tenderhearted, loved by everyone, and was twice selected Student of the Month. But this spring, Abby experienced severe depression and had suicidal thoughts that required specialist help. Abby got this help and was starting to repair her self-esteem, with her psychiatrist strongly advising Hershey to keep her at the school and to continue her therapy there, warning of the consequences of not doing so. But the administration ignored this and ordered Abby's mother to come take her back just 2 days before Abby's 8th grade graduation. They compounded this by barring Abby from returning even just to attend the ceremony. But Abby's house parents tried to make it up by inviting her to a group home graduation picnic so that Abby could at least say goodbye to her friends. But the administration vetoed this too, mystifying even Hershey staff, one of whom was reduced to tears by it. When Abby's family desperately pleaded about what this treatment would do to their psychologically fragile child, the administrators robotically told them being at Hershey is a privilege, not a right. They also told the family that if they tried to show up for graduation or the picnic, security would be called, treating this utterly harmless and blameless child like a pariah. On June 21st, Abby's class marched down the aisle without her, and the next day, Abby's house parents made a trip to Abby's mother's home, where they conducted a special graduation just for Abby. The house parents had Abby wear her best dress, called out her name, and awarded her a diploma, trying to let Abby know that some at Hershey still loved her. But Abby's still recovering self-esteem could not withstand the added blows, and a week later, she took her own life. After telling her brother that she had cried all night and that all she wanted was to return to Hershey, the place she viewed as home, where she had lived for 10 years, since the age of 4. To cap the heartbreak, Abby now is back in Hershey. The administration allowed her to be returned and buried in the Hershey Cemetery, paying for the funeral. It is hard to believe that a child welfare charity with $11 billion in resources would behave like this toward a child merely struggling with depression. And Abby's case illustrates just how utterly dysfunctional Hershey has become. Nor is Abby the only tragedy. We deal with a constant parade of hurt children, kids abused in mixed-age group homes, expelled children, and children driven out by absurd policies. The attrition figures alone should sound alarm bells. But it doesn't have to be this way. So now let's imagine how Hershey would look if this man's principles were still in effect and the anti-child status quo were replaced with a system that elevated kids' interests above all else in a rational way and under leaders who actually understood child welfare. What's been said already should make abundantly clear that the first thing Hershey must do is distinguish between children who are merely poor and those who require residential care. Two radically different categories that call for different services, not Hershey's one-shoe-size-fits-all group home model. But even before that, Hershey has to stop discriminating against disabled kids. You heard that right. They refuse to serve any children with physical disabilities, and Pennsylvania officials won't do a thing about it. You may recall it took Department of Justice intervention last year to force Hershey to stop discriminating against HIV-positive kids. But other disability discrimination continues, and it's indefensible. As for kids who don't require residential care, they can and should be served in their home communities. It's better for kids, it's cheaper, and it avoids the gratuitous cruelty of breaking up poor families. A Hershey day school in Philadelphia, Harrisburg, Pittsburgh, or elsewhere is long overdue for kids simply seeking quality education. Beyond mere education, Hershey should become an $11 billion hub providing a full range of services for needy kids and families and evolve into the orphanage without walls mentioned earlier. For instance, about 100,000 Pennsylvania children have incarcerated parents. Hershey could implement the counseling, assessment, visitation, and reunification programs that these kids and their parents need and that the state legislature is not eager to fund. Nurse visitation is another no-brainer. The program that arranges home visits by nurses to low-income first-time moms, empowering them with basic skills to defeat a host of early child maladies. just the money Hershey wastes on children it belatedly learns it cannot serve, some $20 million annually, could be deployed on this with huge benefits. An analyst graciously provided me with Pennsylvania cost-benefit numbers, and this is how they look. As you can see, spending just $8,491 per family on this program nets the state $51,500 in benefits. That's 2,355 families who could be effectively served each year by rationally deploying the money that Hershey squanders trying to pound round child pegs into square group home holes. Total 10-year benefit to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, $1.4 billion, including serving 23,554 families and preventing 100 infant deaths, 1,200 preterm births, 900 cases of child maltreatments, 3,900 child injuries, 14,400 violent crimes, and 5,900 years of youth substance abuse. Any Pennsylvania politicians watching tonight? Tax-paying voters? Battered women's shelters are another area. Places like Boys Town recognize that preventing abuse and neglect is better than standing around while kids get damaged and then are forced into residential care. Hershey should also fund these shelters, along with other crisis interventions for at-risk kids. To summarize, many kids that Hershey serves don't need expensive and unhealthy group home living, but they and other children do need less expensive and more appropriate services that Hershey can provide. Now let's turn to kids who do require residential care, the subject that means the most to me personally. Here too, Hershey must start by immediately ending discrimination against disabled children, period. Next, Hershey has to rethink its entire group home model. It is archaic and doesn't make sense, at least not as presently implemented. Please try to appreciate the irony. They got rid of virtually all the child-friendly components of Mr. Hershey's original model: community integration, natural settings, open play spaces, farm program, junior college transition bridge. And in each case, it was to advance non-child agendas. But after stripping the school of its residential program crown jewels, they left intact the least child-friendly part, the large group homes, only worsening it by packing Hershey kids into a tight landmass segregated from the community. Leaving aside the anti-child bias that led to this, the antiquated thinking on the group homes needs to change. For instance, Hershey needs to distinguish by age range and stop putting the youngest kids into group homes in any case. These children, 4- and 5-year-olds, need family environments and smaller numbers of children per adult caregiver, not crowded group homes. And I won't insult anyone here tonight by trying to explain why. It's only in the land that time forgot Hershey where you even have to have this silly debate. But even if we're talking about junior high or high school kids, let's do the math on the group homes, which cost $2 million to build and house 12 children, and guess who makes a fortune building them? The same spending buys 7 ordinary homes in the community. So why not house 4 or less children in each of these 7 homes, just as Hershey psychologists have wanted to do for 60 years, only to be blocked by decision makers pursuing non-child goals? That's 28 kids being served for the same capital expenditure instead of 12, and in a much healthier model. Doesn't that make more sense? Even their own model is misconstructed. They divide K through 12 students into 3 divisions: elementary, middle, and high school. And then they make these kids change homes, change house parents, and change housemates multiple times, going from division to division to division. That is, they build instability and dislocation right into their model, not even thinking about permanency or continuity. But let's go beyond group homes. Hershey should tap into a community filled with caring people, retired Hershey staff, Penn State Medical School educators, chocolate factory workers, and leverage the school's resources and deep local ties to create the best foster parent recruiting program in the nation. Why not? Here's where you have the perfect marriage of the old and the new. By using Hershey to train and support this kind of foster parent network, they can take the leap forward that they should have taken in the 1960s by making the original model even more community integrated and home-like. Under the right leadership, Hershey would shatter foster care outcomes and replace them with new standards. Hershey also makes a fetish of what they call lifers, that is, kids who spend their whole lives in the school's institutional setting, even giving them special jackets, as though this is some kind of honor. Let's kill this dinosaur right now. Where Hershey has children who are facing lifer status, the school should parole them, join the 21st century, and give them another status. It's called adoptee. Whether open or traditional, why not create a Hershey adoption service that takes kids from crisis and instability and puts them on a path to permanency? 104 years of Hershey history, more than 15,000 kids in and out, And can you believe they have had not even one adoption, nor even thought about providing this service? Can you imagine how many Hershey alumni I've talked with who told me that all they wanted while growing up was to be adopted, that no one at the school ever hugged them, that they had wished for a family in place of the group homes? Why does the school, and why do we alumni still glorify life or status when the best outcome is the permanency and normalcy of a family, whether biological or adopted? Hershey should create therapeutic homes to help kids with trauma rather than rejecting them, or use therapeutic homes to help children like Abby, who happen to encounter severe depression after enrolling, instead of just kicking them out. Here's one of my favorite: the grandparent model that matches retired couples with foster kids and that has shown such promise elsewhere. They might also utilize a kind of homestay program in the community, giving them another tool in the residential care spectrum with game-changer potential for a certain group of children. They should also stop treating Hershey like a mandatory life sentence and recognize that kids and families may require a short-term intervention, followed by family reintegration. Hershey has a remarkable pool of frontline staff, and it could rely on them to create the kind of intervention homes that Boys Town and others provide. Why not create an adopt-a-group home program where Hershey uses its assets to improve the inadequate services of Pennsylvania group homes? Why not take over their operation and staff them with Hershey-trained professionals? Why not provide tutors, counseling, and other support services for Pennsylvania's under-cared-for group home kids outside Hershey? These people are sitting on $11 billion, but their imaginations don't extend beyond luxury golf, Zim's Palace, and roller coaster rides. Or how about getting really creative and trying a Harlem Children's Zone type of approach by integrating the Hershey charity into its surrounding Dauphin County to provide a full range of prenatal to young adult services centered around a Hershey school hub? I could continue, but I'm sure you get the point. It's time to move beyond Hershey's Jurassic Park policies, end the single-minded fixation on large and costly group homes, and give kids and families the services they need, where they need them, for the length of time they need them, using proven methodologies commonplace everywhere other than Hershey. These guys inherited a hammer and cannot grasp that not every problem is a nail, and that a remarkable number of new tools have been invented over the last 60 years that must be used to fulfill this charity's mission. The model that they cling to spends the most money, especially on construction, but delivers the least good to the fewest kids and with a numbing collateral toll. To those who understand child welfare, everything that I've proposed is obvious. That these kind of programs are not already implemented in Hershey brings us back to the less pleasant part of this talk, a status quo that disfavors needy kids. This starts with self-selecting board members who have scant knowledge of child welfare, recruit clones of themselves also drawn by the money, and are permitted to make poor decisions at every level without any accountability. Even the tragic death of a child brings no consequences for the board. Consider just the school leaders that the board gets away with hiring and whose handiwork includes the $41 million 20-child bedroom fiasco, or slogans like "We call this back to the future." In fact, the school president who made the Ivy League kindergarten comment was hired despite a background check revealing that he had for years been falsely claiming to hold a graduate degree in psychology. His second-in-command made an appalling joke about a disturbing sex act involving a young girl to get laughs from high school boys at a senior class event. He was later promoted and given a raise. Their combined compensation was about $1 million, and they also had themselves featured in local Hershey Museum displays, seen here, all of which illustrates the dubious qualifications, outsized pay, and antics of the senior leadership. Nor is it just the alumni leaders. At every level, personnel choices are driven by cronyism and fealty to the status quo, and control is elevated above quality. Not one key post is filled strictly on the basis of what's good for kids, and many of the best employees and most qualified senior leaders are either driven away or resign. It is completely predictable that this creates an environment where children are subjected to dubious policy and staff are cowed and bullied. Some 80 house-parent couples have departed in the last 2 years, many of them fed up with poor management, and there have been 3 recent house-parent suicides. So dystopian is the environment. A string of shocking scandals has also followed, such as serial pedophile Charles Coons, who had access to Hershey Elementary School kids and committed molestations on par with those of Penn State's Sandusky. Coons preyed on kids for at least 10 years after being reported. Local police lost the investigation file, including sworn affidavits. But unlike Penn State, no one in Hershey faced any accountability. Then there was the senior administrator in charge of training house parents, who is now also in prison for child pornography. Last month, a hockey coach was arrested and is facing 27 counts for alleged sexual contact with a young Hershey student. We could add the dozen or so other teachers, coaches, and staff fired or arrested for sexual acts involving Hershey children. It seems to average about one incident per year, to a point where Hershey may need its own wing in the state penitentiary just for its pedophiles. Another problem going back 60 years that no one wants to discuss. And I submit that these scandals are a predictable result of the culture created under the policies you've heard described, where slogans substitute for child welfare learning, the chase for money rules all, caring staff are intimidated, and kids who need the most help are thrown under the bus. The HIV-positive boy, kids who were sexually abused and kicked out, Abby Bartels, disabled kids, and any other child who might detract from the pristine image being manufactured. When administrators tell the frantic parents of a depressed and suicidal child, being at Hershey is a privilege, not a right, and the school psychologist breaks down crying on the phone because he cannot do anything about it, it is a leadership culture problem. When the second highest ranking administrator makes off-color jokes at the expense of a girl who had been sexually sadly demeaned when boys video recorded 3-on-1 sex with her, it is a leadership culture problem. When caring critics, whether house parents or alumni, are the targets of administration-fueled hate campaigns that prevent civil and honest conversation about policy, it is a leadership culture problem. And this continues only because the authorities refuse to disrupt a status quo that benefits them directly, never mind needy kids or Pennsylvania taxpayers. To not mince words, few things so excite politicians' salivation like Pavlov's dogs responding to a dinner bell, as billions in rich patronage, lucrative contracts, campaign cash, and high-pay minimum show board positions, all ripe for plucking, merely by perpetuating a racket that treats needy kids like children of a lesser god. Governors from both parties have held inaugural celebrations at Founders Hall using unpaid Hershey students as waiters, parking lot attendants, and the cleanup crew. Here is one example, Republican Governor Dick Thornburgh. Karl Rove was the guest of honor at a Hershey Mansion Republican fundraiser, and needy kids were charged another $5,000 for the event. We were provided with this letter, which appears to indicate an initial attempt anyway to disguise a campaign contribution as an invoice. Another $10,000, as you can see here, went to former Democratic Governor Ed Rendell's campaign from a PAC associated with Herco, the company described earlier. Then there was Attorney General Mike Fisher, now a judge on the Third Circuit, who also got money from the same Herco PAC and was reportedly at Hotel Hershey collecting it at the very minute that the alumni were meeting with his subordinates about their Hershey investigation. Herco's board also includes past Republican candidate for Governor Lynn Swann and Governor Rendell allied Democrat Sheila Dow-Ford, both appointed in 2003, while former Republican Governor Tom Ridge was appointed in 2007 to the Hershey Company Board, which is also controlled by the charity. The list is endless. This charity is riddled with connected insider and political appointments as both parties cash in. But not one child welfare expert has been named to the board, so perverse are their priorities. We had earnestly hoped that things might change under current Attorney General Kathleen Kane, the first ever woman or Democrat elected to the office. That hope was translated into the Hershey Advisory Council that I described earlier. General Kane had promised to at least meet with his dream team of experts and hear their recommendations on changing the Hershey status quo, utilizing the nearly 3-year investigation that she inherited with its unprecedented opportunity for reform. General Kane made a point of promising that she would secure real reforms, even if it made leading Democrats unhappy. She then proceeded to break each of these and every other promise, including not meeting with the independent advisors at all after their time had been wasted coordinating meeting dates. Well, I wish I had time to regale you with the almost comical blow-by-blow of this blatantly political backpedaling. Reporting the results will tell you all you need to know. On May 8th, General Kane closed the investigation and ratified all the board's decisions with no one held accountable for anything, nor required to pay even one dime of restitution. This included approving the $25 million squandered on a luxury golf course. General Kane decided to accept the board's flimsy excuse that they had actually purchased it for Hershey Group Homes and had built the $5 million clubhouse for Hershey kids. Never mind an 8-year written trail showing the exact opposite that could easily have been leveraged to extract dramatic reform concessions and board resignations. But instead, General Kane gave the board a free pass and struck an agreement allowing them to continue to make millions, leaving the worst offenders in place. even the low-pay board members will still be able to draw over $100,000 annually at rates upward of $1,000 per hour, or more than Wall Street hedge fund lawyer hourly rates. Dangerous residential practices will also still be permitted. The board will not have to name even one child welfare expert so long as they interview, not choose, just interview candidates under a meaningless definition of expert. But General Cain did get tough about the free golf, lavish wining and dining, spa treatments, and overnight stays at the luxurious Zim's Palace, Hotel Hershey. These indulgences are strictly limited to, drumroll, board members, their spouses, and their children. That is, no grandchildren, cousins, or other distant relatives may charge needy kids for these items on Kathleen Cain's scrutinizing watch. Another preposterous touch is General Cain's per diem rule. The board can charge the charity $4,500 for each of these, and they can charge 2 or even 3 per day. A novel approach to per diems. I guess she meant half diems. We have a full analysis of General Cain's so-called reforms on our website, and I invite you to review it. General Cain described these as setting a new standard for charitable boards, which is true. No other charity has ever before been invited by a state attorney general to embark on this kind of unbridled self-enrichment and perk indulgence. Within 2 months, on July 9th, the Hershey board responded to this oversight chocolate kiss in a manner that illustrates what I have said about leadership selection, disregard for needy kids' interests, and politicization of this charity. They named Democratic insider John Estey as the interim Hershey school president, an individual with no child welfare qualifications. But Mr. Estey had provided something more important to a Hershey board that had been desperate to cling to power and secure the lenient treatment that it got from the newly elected Democratic AG. He was former Democratic Governor Ed Rendell's chief of staff. But wait, Mr. Estey is also the brother-in-law of General Cain's own chief of staff, Mr. Adrian King. But wait again, Governor Rendell, Mr. Estey, and Mr. King were all also partners of the same Philadelphia law firm, Ballard Spahr. What a set of coincidences. Again, you can't make this stuff up. General Cain's aspirations for higher office will, of course, be greatly aided by support from the key Democratic backers, whom she made very happy in regard to Hershey, when she left intact a lucrative status quo that they and their allies seek to monetize, including ones lining up today for the rich positions that this charity will steadily dispense to those with the right connections. And with the symmetry of Greek drama, these political machinations all occurred just when a child named Abby Bartels was being victimized by the very system that they have created, exploited for decades, and once again shored up. So Abby may be dead, kids may be leaving Hershey in shocking numbers, policies may be disjointed, employees may be bullied, money may be squandered. But not to worry, because Pennsylvania's Democrats are poised to enjoy their turn at the Hershey spoils, with an accommodating Democratic Attorney General having demonstrated that anything goes, just as with her Republican predecessors. All of which is to say, we no longer have any illusions about Pennsylvania officials rescuing needy kids. And those of you who have given up on bipartisan cooperation can have their faith restored merely by looking at Hershey, where the two parties have demonstrated decades of harmonious relations in sharing patronage spoils, turning a blind eye to misconduct, and otherwise working together in a congenial spirit to pickpocket needy kids. Nor will this pattern change so long as oversight is left to compromise officials who simply cannot resist the temptation to barter needy kids' interests for political capital. But rather than raising the white flag, this talk was scheduled in response to try to impart some small glimmer of what magnificent good the $11 billion Hershey charity could achieve, the number of kids and families that could be helped, and the unparalleled benefits that this would generate if only we could change the status quo, and in the hope that the public will agree and decide to do something about it. To this end, our group is launching tonight a Justice for Abby campaign with Abby's family support to make sure that no other child is ever again subjected to what Abby faced, and to replace the politician and crony-friendly Hershey status quo with one that will put needy children first. The goals are simple. We are petitioning General Cain to name a credible outside interim Hershey school president to start reshaping policy immediately, and to also immediately replace the Hershey board with a fully volunteer one, comprised primarily of genuine child welfare professionals, unbeholden to either political party, and with proven records of service to needy kids. These items are so basic for an $11 billion child welfare charity that they should not even require a petition. And time will tell whether the public lends us the support that we need to achieve them. But for my part, I've given this matter heart and soul for 14 years, much of it a disturbing lesson in the politics of powerlessness. I'm certainly fatigued from it and must confess that there are times when the biggest struggle is resisting cynicism. But I've persevered, and my own views on congregate care have matured over time, culminating in what you've heard tonight. And if anything captures the peace that I've made with the world as it is versus the one we want to build, and with the ideal of justice versus what we can extract from an inadequate system gamed by clever operators, it's a James Baldwin passage that I came across while still in law school, and that has sustained me for years, and that I think will sustain others too in our audience or viewing this, who experienced the system in some form and then struggled with its effects. If one is continually surviving the worst that life can bring, one eventually ceases to be controlled by a fear of what life can bring. Whatever it brings must be borne, and at this level of experience, one's bitterness begins to be palatable, and hatred becomes too heavy a sack to carry. And that's a good place to say thank you all, including our web guests, for your patience and attention. You've been a very gracious audience. And thank you again, Betsy and the CAP team. You folks have made a huge difference in this otherwise totally lopsided struggle.
And I'm Betsy Bartholet. I'm the faculty director of the Child Advocacy Program here at Harvard. Should we get rid of this, Rick, or do you want this?
I don't need it. Let me get rid of it.
Thank you. So I believe that there are a number of people in the audience here in this room, and unfortunately the webcast audience is not in a position to ask questions, but they can hear all of you. And there are going to be people with a mic, so that those of you who have a question, please use the mic so that people listening on the webcast can hear. But I'm hoping that those of you who are here, who do include many who I think have had experience with and have knowledge of Hershey, will participate and give Rick your questions. I'd appreciate it if people could try to keep questions relatively short and direct for Rick. Rick, you've covered an enormous amount of territory. And I just want to join Mary in saying that it's just enormously impressive what you've done with your life to try to make a difference for the children at Hershey. Who would like to get started with some questions? Yes, in the front.
I find it very interesting that you talked about how the school was against reform and for the status quo, but yet showed several different things that they tried to change that may or may not have worked, and I understand that. And I think that even here at the pinnacle of learning at Harvard University, that there's still scandals and crisis and lavish treatment of board members and things like that. And I think anytime you're dealing with people, you find that. But I think for the 7,500 living alumni, I don't think you speak for all of us. And if there's anything that I can say that I've learned from being here at Harvard is that there's a danger in a single story. And I know that my mother, and I went to Milton Hershey School, and I'm graduated from Milton Hershey School and was there for 6 years as well, that my mother did not have to surrender me to the school, that she was very active, and I was from New York, and she still came down every weekend, took visiting time, came to every time I cheered, I sang, I danced, I was in the band, I did everything. She was there. When I was at a track meet, she would become, so I still had a family. But for those of my classmates who did not have families, they still were fully active, and I know some lifers, and they take great pride in being lifers, and that doesn't mean they didn't have families, but they were there with their siblings, and they do, like you said, and you didn't understand why they were proud, but that it was such a good place that they did have those relationships with their house parents. You spoke of house parents who had committed suicide. My house father was one of them. But I can tell you from being part of that is it had nothing to do with being at Hershey. I am now here in Professor Bartholet's class for the Art of Social Change because I do want to make a difference, and I do believe in child advocacy, and I'm big in education. I've been a principal for 5 years now. I, however, don't agree with everything, and I think that you've picked and chosen some things to highlight. For example, at the beginning you talked about a waste of money with the Penn State Hospital, but that hospital saved my brother's life, who was dying of pancreatitis. You talked about Founders Hall and how it's not being used, but that is where I had lunch every day in middle school and where my prom was, and I'm sure yours was as well. And then Hershey Park, which I can tell you I have many beautiful memories of Hershey Park as a child, because that was the one place we were able to go every weekend free, because there really wasn't much else to do in Hershey, to be honest with you, but milk cows. I still, to this day, can't stand the smell of chocolate because I equate it with manure, but that's not the point. The point is that it surprises me that in your time there that you have nothing positive to say about the school and about what it does, because I can tell you that I am on Facebook every night with alumni and with friends, and all of us, I would not be here at Harvard if it wasn't for Milton Hershey School. And I did not need a residential experience. However, it was what was best because I was coming from a violent area in New York. But I thrived there and I was able to move on with my life. And so I just really would like to hear if you had anything positive to say about Milton Hershey School and your experience there.
Well, so first of all, thank you for the comment. And I was hoping that there would be some alumni here, so right away. If I've given the impression that Hershey is all bad, then that's a bad impression. We have, I think, 8,000 alumni. The reality is it's a mixed outcome. And I try to look at numbers. We don't have good outcome data. We have thousands of alumni who don't go back. Just a little experiment. How many people know one person from their high school that committed suicide? Raise your hands. If you know of 2 people from your high school that committed suicide. If you know of 3 people. If you know of 4 people. 5 people. 6 people. 7 people. My point is, we don't have data because no one's collected it. But we know that we have alumni who, for some reason, really, really are carrying pain. And this is stuff that we can explore. We see a lot of success stories. You're an example. Ken Brady, class of 1940, 91 years young, is another example. But what about the people that we talk with who end up spending their whole lives? They don't have families. They have all sorts of pathologies. If you look at the impact of group home living on people over their lifespan, I'm just saying that the science doesn't support it. And if you take kids like a 4-year-old girl and you put her into a group home situation, she doesn't need it, you're basically doing damage, in my opinion. And I think that there's plenty of research to back that up. But leaving that aside, you had a good experience. So, that forms your opinion. I did very well there. And it was a mixed experience. But that doesn't drive my thinking on Hershey. What drives my thinking is sort of an analytic overview that I thought I just explained. You said the Hershey the Medical Center saved your life. That's great, but that doesn't make it legal to take all that money and all that land from needy kids. You said that you didn't need the school as a residential program. We have 14,000 foster care kids in Pennsylvania. Okay, so I'm glad that you had a good experience there. But what they did over time was reject those foster care kids who had nowhere else to go. They didn't have the mother who was coming every weekend. So, I mean, you're happy that it worked out for you, and I'm happy too that it worked out for you. And I just think that there are a lot of other kids who have nothing, and this charity was created for orphan children. Now, that's evolved over time. There are different ways of looking at it, but the bottom line is they supplanted kids in residential care who had nothing and put kids in the school who had something, and they built their whole model around it. So every point you made, I mean, I don't know what else to say, but...
Rick, let's get...
Sure.
I don't want to cut
Sure.
you off, but I want to get in other comments.
I don't want to...
And right
it would be
behind
a debate.
there, go
Please.
ahead.
Just a quick question. You said the Justice for Abby campaign is kicking off today. Is that you're announcing it here today, or it's
Yeah,
actually starting?
we're going to launch it on our website. And
Is anyone presenting any of that information to Attorney General Keane when she's here at Harvard tomorrow?
I just found out that she's here, so I'm going to extend my stay.
Noon to 12:50, Langdell 225.
Langdell 225 will certainly be there. Thank you.
Other questions from this group? Come on, group. I feel there must be. Go ahead. Melissa.
Can you talk a little bit about the school's rationale behind not admitting children on the mental health spectrum?
So again, it's a bit complicated, but what they did was they just restructured the whole program, and they started selecting away from kids who have particular problems that you might see in residential care because they don't want to deal with them. They're trying to create a prep school for the poor model. And I think that they're confused about their policies. And I say this not trying to be critical of them. I'm being critical, of course. But by way of explanation, it's not that they are intentionally trying to hurt kids. There's no doubt that the intentions are good. It's just that they don't really know what they're doing, and they won't get the help that they need. And the Attorney General won't force them to get the help they need. So.
I think in particular that they don't have the resources to treat the mental illnesses or the specialized individuals there to work with those children.
Yeah, I mean, so for instance, if you look at Boys Town, all right, so they create special programs just for those kids. And the model Hershey that I'd like to see, since it's got so many resources, it's a smorgasbord. And it takes kids who need the specialist care and it provides them in a therapeutic home. And by the way, 50, 60 years ago, these school psychologists were recommending a therapeutic home for kids who needed it at entry, and also for kids who needed it after they were there. And there are a lot of tragedies about kids who, basically fell apart and then ended up leaving. Thank you.
Yes.
Hi, Rick. Marcy Harding.
Hi, Marcy.
I look at the world through the lens of ethics and money and power, and have spent most of the last 30 years on issues related to corporate governance and fiduciary obligation in the investor realm. We've come a long way with regard to corporate and investor accountability, in part due to, although fossil fuel divestment, is certainly a current conflict that suggests we've a long way to go. And the reason is that civil society created different accountability structures, along with shareholder activist groups, people like Bob Monk's, the program here at Harvard, to address the power breakdown in governance in both the private sector and among investors in terms of their fiduciary role. I'm wondering, and you and I have talked about this in terms of the endowments, is there a similar opportunity to look at civil society structures to address the governance breakdown in the nonprofit area, which clearly this is? It's a fiduciary breach, you could argue, in terms of the governance and the oversight of the Hershey School. And if it's not going to be Mark Vasella and the Pennsylvania Attorney General's office, which is the government arm that presumably would address that, and it's certainly not going to be the private sector because they're all in cahoots with each other, what are the options available for some kind of civic stewardship option that might emerge out of civil society to address not just the problems at Hershey, but the multiple problems that exist among other endowments that may be playing fast and loose with their investments, but certainly are not living up to the obligation of the donor's original intent, or where a strong case could be made that the fiduciary obligation has been breached.
Wow. So as a third force to, engage in the kind of,
Beyond this, I mean, that's what that is, but in more of a larger network sense.
That's very hard for me to answer because I just don't know. But I will say that somebody had told me 3 years ago that the most important thing that could happen is that the New York Times would write an article. And the Philadelphia Inquirer, Bob Fernandez, has written a pretty amazing series, www.philly.com/Hershey. And for example, in 2010, we had hammered them about the golf course and the money that was spent on it maybe a dozen times. Letters, we raised it in our court filings, nothing was done. Bob Fernandez wrote one article in the Philadelphia Inquirer 2 days later, Tom Corbett, Attorney General, announced that he had an investigation going. That was the investigation that Kathleen Kane inherited. So my point being, when you put a public spotlight on these guys, it's amazing how they react. And that was part of why I did this tonight, because when you lay out all these facts over time and you look at the numbers, it really is hard to deny that there's a lot of room for improvement. So I don't know if I got your answer quite right, but that's basically it's about publicity. Most charity.
The press is a watchdog, so that's a role that they can play. But I'm thinking there's a systemic problem here affecting not just the Hershey School, but many other nonprofit organizations that have emerged, like they've grown like Topsy over the last 30 years, just all over the place. And so using the parallel in terms of the size of the sustainability movement now affecting corporate governance, which none of us who've been around for a long time would have expected to be the case. A lot of that because of sort of organized action emanating from civil society. I'm wondering, through social media or through other kinds of networking activities, certainly this program here is one example, how might collective action around, with the Hershey School sort of being sort of the door opener to a fuller consideration of where these power breakdowns occur and violations of fiduciary obligation take place. It's taxpayers who are underwriting organizations that are spending money in the wrong ways, basically. It seems that's a very compelling argument in this day and age.
Can I just add to that, since we are at a law school? I mean, if what you describe is even halfway the truth, why aren't there legal violations that can be taken to courts of law? And I know you have done some things along those lines. So if the political figures won't act, well, will judges act? Is that hopeless? Does the law mean nothing? Because
Yeah,
I assume you're describing a lot of
I'm glad you
law
asked that
violations.
question, yeah, because you would think. So the first problem we face is prosecutorial discretion. So I use that golf course example because it's really telling.
There's criminal and civil.
Criminal and civil, and even on civil though, another prosecutor would have, if not obtained, restitution, certainly would have had them leave the board. I mean, they voted for this thing, and then they came up with this, we bought it for the kids. In fact, they'd bought other land. They had 10,000, how many acres of land do they need, and on and on. So when the attorneys general, exercise the discretion to not do anything, there's nothing you can do. So that opens up the third-party standing question. In 2003, they had a reform agreement that they tore up and threw away. And the Alumni Association then went into court and sought to enforce it. We got slammed at the trial court. The judge called our prayer for relief preposterous. He said the filing was improvident. The appellate court, the Commonwealth Court, 4-3 ruling, stunning decision, reversed and remanded, said that we had standing to compel the Attorney General and the Board of Managers to explain in court why they rescinded their own reform agreement. Landmark case. Went up to the state Supreme Court. It was like something out of a movie. Former Attorney General Leroy Zimmerman was sitting next to current Attorney General Tom Corbett. I think one of Attorney General Zimmerman's former deputies was on the bench. It was not a pretty sight, and needless to say, we lost. And so the point being that I describe it like North Korea. We've gotten nowhere. The judiciary's not helping us out. The legislature, kids are not. These kids don't have a constituency. They don't make campaign contributions. They're not big voting blocks. So, versus a board that can hand out HERCO board seats, which is why I kept pointing those out. These were totally politicized appointments. Even when some people may be qualified, they're not getting them for their qualifications. Contracts, lots of local job holders. The HERCO itself is really, it's an entire case study. How many years have they subsidized that company without really having returns coming back to the charity? It's in my view, it's a breach of fiduciary duty that an attorney general could act on. The thing is, also in Hershey, even when we sort of go with our hat in hand and try to extract small concessions, gee, could you name one child welfare professional to the board? They're so imperious. They have so much power. They just laugh you off. And the reason I kept mentioning the alumni is because the alumni who are happy with what's going on, who are making a lot of money, are essentially put in these really nice positions. And again, question of qualifications arises. And so, who's going to challenge them? The alumni used to be a force of reform in 2003 to 2002, 2001. But once the alumni leadership got these in control, that was it. So anyway, the point is there aren't any legal mechanisms, and the public, we haven't been able to get engaged. The Philadelphia Inquirer's got a good series. We're hoping that that'll do something. But think about Penn State Sandusky. Everyone in the country knows about it. Nobody knows about Charles Coons. Coons was probably worse. It continued, it was worse. More kids were molested, and no one even talks about it. None of, the media were very hush-hush about it. We pounded whatever you can do, right? So when I say I get cynical about the media because we've gotten almost no help. Bob Fernandez of the Inquirer has been a game changer. His series has just made people pay attention. But all it's done is made them a little bit ashamed. It didn't stop them from pulling this stunt where Kathleen Kane, look at what she did. She did nothing. She actually improved nothing at all, and she got away with it, even though the Inquirer had run this long series of articles. Now, had the Inquirer done an article on attrition and the kids being expelled, I wonder if they would have treated Abby a little differently. I don't know. So
we have time for another couple of questions. Go ahead in the back. Well, let's everybody, if you could just wait for the mic so everybody in the webcast can hear you.
So sort of along these same lines about legal means for trying to address this issue, I don't know if there's any litigation around the Abby campaign that's being planned. Just because what happened to her seems just so egregious, and the fact that it's a story about this individual sometimes really connects with people. So just thoughts on that.
Thank you. Yeah, so, and again, I'm getting my wits back to me, but so we have so many kids who have tried to take legal action and have gotten nowhere. The cases they're not lucrative, so they can't get pro bono attorneys. Cesar Escudero is the best example. Wonderful, wonderful young man. One of the nicest kids I've ever met. Superstar, model student. I don't know what happened, but he annoyed one principal. He got bounced. And, he tried and he tried and he tried. He filed a pro se action in federal court, and they got nowhere. There's another young man who I think is about to file a case that also had the similar problems. My point is, there are a parade of these kids who've been expelled. They don't have causes, they haven't found causes of action that can be sustained. So it's the problem of all this discretion that the board has. And here's a really, really important thing. When I argue with Mark Pasella at the Attorney General's office, or I used to, I gave up, and I'll tell you why I gave up later on. Actually, I'll tell you now. 10 years ago, they were housing kids in multi-age group homes, and these kids were getting sexually abused. And we went to a meeting with Mark Pasella in the Attorney General's office, December 2001, stood in a room full of alumni, and he promised to make change, et cetera, and so forth. He said, we know the hours between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. pass very slowly for some of these kids. I'll never forget it. Because I said, why doesn't the office intervene right now? And he basically told me the wheels of justice in the office move slow and blah, 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 but we'll get change. In July of that year, they agreed to a whole bunch of safety measures that would have ended much of the worst of the multi-age housing. Last summer, lo and behold, I got another call. Kids was in a group home with a boy twice his age. Same, horrible. And the kid was expelled too after the abuse. That was it. That was the last time I really wanted to talk with, I'd like to say my friend Mark. I just gave up. My point is they won't do anything. And my argument with Mark and the OAG has been this. You say they have the discretion. They're allowed to make these mistakes. But why don't you put child welfare professionals in charge? That way we know that when they exercise their discretion and it doesn't work out, okay, you win some, you lose some, people make mistakes. But when you have a board of lawyers and investment bankers and politicians, why is anybody surprised that they come up with cockamamie ideas like 40-child block housing or Springboard Academy or any of the other things? So, that's a good question. There hasn't been traction on any of the legal stuff, except for individual cases where kids are hurt and they can, seek damages. And I think Hershey has paid out a lot of money because of a lot of the pedophiles.
So I think if we end the formal part soon, there'll be an opportunity for anybody who wants to talk to Rick and to talk to each other,
Yeah.
but I will take another couple of questions. Usaf.
Hi, Rick. I'm quite impressed with your presentation.
Thank you.
The points that have come to my mind from the presentation, or what I haven't been able to understand from the presentation, are that there is neglect and abuse of children. Then there is impunity of Hershey board and officials, and indifference of the society, and injustice because of inaction of the courts, the government, and the US Congress. So these are the 3-4 points I have been able to make from your presentation. On the other hand, I'm a child rights activist from India, and my experience in India has been somewhat very different. See, in India, if you have this kind of an abuse happening, no matter how powerful or rich anyone might be, he'll be in jail. I've had personal experiences where I took on these kind of homes, and people who were best friends with even the Prime Minister, that's being a good friend of even Barack Obama in America, but because of good litigation and social media pressure, these people are now in jail, So that kind of experiment could actually work in India. So I want to know from you why that experiment is not working in America. Because I'm shocked the way this American judiciary is really treating such cases with no sense of sensitivity or compassion towards the plight of children who are facing abuse on a daily basis. So in a sense, is the American judiciary a little less compassionate towards the children who face abuse in homes like this? And do they not support social impact litigations?
That's a really great, that's a powerful question. I'm sure that everybody here who's in child welfare has the same reaction. We struggle. I see people who care deeply and react once they know. It's a problem. How does it get publicized? There's a bit of a flash in the pan problem. A child dies in foster care, an abusive home. The media is outraged. 4 days later, it's back to the latest, it's Paris Hilton and whatever's going on. And so people's attention span is short. It takes a sustained effort, and that takes a lobbying group. And personally, I think that most people, when they see this kind of injustice and they're aware of it, they get angry and they get involved. And it comes down to whether you can exploit the media and get people to understand what's happening. Hershey is kind of tough because they have so much money. And they can buy advertisements during the Academy Awards, which they did, the season finale of Mad Men, which they did, and on and on and on. And we don't have the ability to match that.
Yeah,
Sure, please, Ken.
And then behind you. We need
Ken.
Thank you. I was raised in the home. I went in the home in 1929. Mr. Hershey died in 1945. And the farm that I was on, I remember Mr. Hershey coming out many times to check on us. He did not have any children. His wife died real young. And he would come out and check on us all by himself. He didn't bring an entourage of others with him to put on the show. He was really concerned about our well-being. And he would come out and sit down and have dinner with us. I don't remember if we saved a chair at a table for him, not knowing when he would show up. But he came out quite often to check on us. And I'll give you a good little example if I have the moment. The one farm I lived on, we had 2 barns. And the cows would go over to the smaller barn after milking in the evening. And during milking, one of us had to be in the other barn all by ourselves putting in hay for the cows after the milking. And one evening it was my turn to be in the barn all by myself. And I'm putting in the hay, and I felt a tap on my shoulder, and I turned around, and here was Mr. Hershey, all by himself. But that's how he would come and check and see how things were going to the benefit. He always called us his children, and that's how he checked on us. And years later, I often thought, why did he come out to check on an empty barn? And but that's how he was. He would come and check on us.
Why don't you hand the mic to the woman behind you? And this may be the last question, I think, and we'll give you a chance to respond and then break up and people can talk informally.
Hi, I'm Christina Rodriguez. I am the treasurer for the Mass chapter of the Foster Care Alumni of America. Since I come from a financial background, reading the numbers and looking at the numbers, it was appalling, actually. And I took an accounting and finance course at Bentley, and the real focus they had was on the Enron case in regards to the scandal, in regards to the accounting fraud. And when you shared everything about this whole thing, that's all I thought of was, wow, this is like the Enron scandal. They're fudging up the numbers, and it's not going to where it should be. And I guess my question is in regards to getting this brought to the judge or the media, isn't that something that we could mention? You know, don't you get that not only is it the money's not going to the children that need it, but it's very similar to the, at least in my opinion, that's really what I got from it.
Yeah, that's a good question. And again, so how do you articulate this debacle, which is what it is? And one of the ways we articulated it, we called it the child welfare Enron. And we hammered that. And in fact, in 2002, the Hershey board had the dubious distinction of being on Business Week's bottom 10 list. I think Global Crossing and a couple of other, it's really, really. So, but again, flash in the pan and then everybody forgot about it. And I think part of the issue is what my fellow alumna gets to. There are plenty of people who have happy experiences, and that's who Hershey puts out there. And come to our graduation and see all the happy kids. And I want to, when they graduate 1,400 kids, here they are, everybody's smiling and happy. Some of them are not so happy. What about the 2,000 kids who had their lives disrupted? So the point is, there are plenty of ways to articulate that. And it does come down to me, it's about data. And I look at that and I say, you're doing this much damage to get this much good. You're spending $100,000 a year. Are these kids better served in that environment? I want to mention, my co-counsel in Philadelphia, John Schmale, Dilworth Paxson Law Firm, only blue chip firm in Pennsylvania that stepped to the plate because all the other ones have contracts, with Hershey, with some Hershey entity somewhere, or they want them. But the point is, we put out this editorial because Girard College is also a mismanaged child welfare facility. And we said, well, why don't you take Girard's financial difficulties and use it as a bridge to open a Hershey, a day school, connect with them. And so point is, we want to talk about these numbers. And if you make a data-driven analysis and you look at dollars and cents, it starts to become compelling if you can get people to listen. And so that's part of it. And so I want to also make clear, many alumni, myself included, feel fiercely loyal to the school. But that's not to excuse the boatloads of damage that's being done, the policies that are hurting kids, the staff that's being driven away, the fact that a child like Abby could experience what she experienced. This, to me, is so beyond the pale, but we've dealt with similar cases. It's just that they didn't end up in a suicide a week after the child was removed. And so people are seeing it. I don't know how many other depressed kids killed themselves. I don't know. But I do know that this has happened before because I called the Attorney General and raised Cain about it, no pun intended. Can't get them to do anything. So again, we look at data. If we can get people to look at it, this, to me, is the moment of truth. I used to say to Mark Pacello, if they had a pedophile ring operating out of a group home, you guys might finally do something. And then we had Coons, who was the equivalent. I mean, this guy is worse than Sandusky, basically. We still didn't get change. So then I said, well, you know, I guess it's going to take a dead child before you guys act, Mark. And I said, Mark, one of these days, you're going to get called. It's going to be because some, you know, kid's dead this time. Well, now they have a dead child. And I'm thinking if the public isn't going to care enough to say, you know what, thank these people for their services, tell them it's time to move on. Let's put some people in charge of the charity who know what they're doing, who don't happen to be, you know, Ed Rendell's former chief of staff and the brother-in-law of Kathleen Kane's chief of staff. Let's put some child welfare people involved and a board that's comprised of child welfare, and let's try that out and see how that looks since we've had decades of all these problems. And so, you know, I don't know. A couple of you have talked about media. I'm hoping, look, this is heartbreaking. Abby's case is so devastating, and looking at the photographs and putting stuff together, you know, no one who's gotten near Abby has not been affected by it. It's just incredible. But the family is clear that they don't want Abby's death to be in vain. They want a change to come. They don't want any other kids treated this way. And a Tunisian man commits, you know, immolates himself, and the government falls. In Cairo, you know, the government thugs beat somebody up, beat him to death. The government fell. You never know when some moment is going to get people to finally say, you know what, enough's enough. And I'm thinking, people are going to look at this and say, you know what, enough's enough. And when you back it up with all this data, I think the argument's compelling. But what do I know?
Thanks, Rick.
Can I add something?
Okay,
Please.
go ahead.
Please.
Well, wait for the mic.
I've listened to Rick's rhetoric for years
Yeah.
as an alumnus of the school. There are 9,000 alumni. We call ourselves brothers and sisters. And I am absolutely appalled at what I hear over and over and over again. It's a broken record. And it's half truths. It's not all truths. There are some truths to it. The golf course. Ask any alumni. We don't want them buying a golf course. And we stand up in union against that. But the reason you don't get action is because he's cried wolf way too many times. And there's not enough validity to it. So when you go to all these people and they listen and then they certainly look, but there's no charges, right? There's none of this stuff happening. It's true that the Alumni Association sued the school. And Rick was very, very involved in that. And I will tell you from being involved in the Alumni Association that I believe, in my personal opinion, that lawsuit bankrupted the Alumni Association. And we have spent 8 years trying to rebuild camaraderie, that a knife was driven right through. Raise your hand if you've ever sued your parents. Raise your hand if have you sued your home. That's what he led the charge.
May I respond?
So it's very hurtful. And when he says that alumni are thrown out there and put up on a pedestal and put the school, yeah, I was the youngest of 3 kids. I spent 7 years like he did there. I was the first to graduate high school and the only one not to go to prison. So if you don't think that school changed my life, then like her, it changed her life. Now, yeah, you're always going to have problems, no matter where you are, no matter whether you're down the street at a local high school. You know, there's teachers in every town that get arrested for this stuff. So what he chooses is to pick on the faults and never to prop up the positives. And he even said that himself.
So I think it's very
May I at least
helpful,
respond?
just a sec, that you guys came and that we've heard some really pretty dramatically different views. Gonna let you respond, but really only for a minute or two, okay?
Sure.
Because I think we have to come to
I made
an
it
end.
crystal clear.
We could talk,
Yeah.
I'm sure, for lots longer in terms of the amount of passion that's in this room, but we're not going to. So I'll give you a minute or two, and then we're just going to end, and it won't be the last word. You're going to have a different view, and I understand that, and many, probably others in the room also.
Sure. Look, I made very clear that Hershey outcomes have shattered those of foster care and traditional orphanages. I'm very clear that Hershey has wonderful parts of its model. And I want more kids to be able to enjoy all of those benefits that we had. When you've got $11 billion and you're serving this few kids and you're serving them with this kind of failure rate, there are severe problems. You say that I cry wolf, I cried wolf about multi-age housing. We still had it going on and kids were sexually abused. You don't know about that, or you didn't do anything about that because you didn't have to deal with those kids, and maybe you don't care. I cried wolf about depressed children being expelled. We have a dead child. If you think that that's crying wolf, then you and I have a different definition of it. I have given you data upon data upon data to show and talked about creative programs. I've talked about things like Springboard Academy, $41 million. And what you've given me is basically what you, and this gets into sort of a he said, she said, but talk about rhetoric. Right? Springboard Academy and 20-child bedrooms, 40-child block housing, and sloganeering. Look, people have heard what I've said. They've heard what this gentleman said and what this woman said. You can make up your own minds. And that's it.
Well, thank you, Ric. Thank you all for coming.